Hello, this is Max Drake. I just want to talk about data and backup. I'm actually just going through the exercise of trying to preserve some of the stuff because I've been losing quite a lot of data lately and it's upsetting me. And so I started to look into it, and as I looked into it, I started to think a bit more. And when I was looking on the YouTube and other places about information, it was talking about one specific storage solution for something. But I suddenly thought, well, let's go a bit broader on this. So when I actually just typed in personal data, what it came out about was about your digital footprint and you know how you protect your information from other people, other companies gobbling it up and using it to manipulate people. So I want to use a sort of scenario of you've got lots of stuff on your pooter, and what do I do with it? Suddenly the drives suddenly start filling up and things start slowing down. You've most probably got a lot of different type stuff, different data types and things like this. So what to keep and what to ignore and even what to get rid of. And so there's this sort of like squirrel hoarding data you've gathered, created, purchased and consumed or whatever. You've got all these things on there. You just don't think it's easy to grab things. I found some stuff on the Enclosure, I download that PDF, I've got this, I've got that. Suddenly, you know, and because storage is reasonably cheap, it's very easy just to grab stuff and put it on there. You suddenly think, oh, it's getting a bit much here. Oh, I'll just get an external drive and I just plug it in and I just copy it across to that. So I've got myself a 4 TB Digglybot external drive and I just copy everything onto that. So that is a solution, but it's not necessarily the best one. So first of all, I just want to jump back in and say, well, what is the value of your data? And when I started to reflect on this, as I said, there's all this thing about data and how it's valuable for businesses to make more money off you, and we'll take this and we can then do all of these things and we can start aiming ads specific for these sorts of things to sell things to people. But what is that the data worth to you? Now there's a couple of things there. You know, there's the sort of the my working data, so data where I've worked on projects or I've done things like I've written books or I've written courses or I do some programming and things like that. So they're working stuff that I do. And they're sort of an abstraction of a part of my life that you have with your curriculum vitae or your resume, and you're suddenly saying, well, I do these sorts of things, or I worked on this project and I did that. And then they said, well, prove that. Well, you can suddenly say, well, yeah, here's some data about it. Here's a whole lot of data that I've got on building a certain building, and here's the drawings, and this is the issue we had on here, so that you can talk to that information and the data that you actually have to show to substantiate what you're actually the claims that you're making inside a CV or something like that. So it is an abstraction of part of the skill set that you've actually got by representing other projects that you've actually worked on. There's also personal data, like there's things like I bought a few videos because I really like that video, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, or you know, whatever ones you actually prefer or things like that. And you've got a copy of the video on your thing, or you've got some audio books that you've got, or you've got some ebooks that you've actually got. Some of them are actually linked in so that you can only actually purchase them through Kindle, or some of them you can actually get so you can download a copy onto your own personal computer and actually have that way. So there's things there that give you pleasure, and there's things like a lot of the photos that you're actually creating and generating as well. So there's personal stuff through there, and there's also things like emails where you've got a friend overseas and you knew them, you know, they're your school friend and they've gone overseas and you're sort of keeping in touch, and what's actually happening through there. And I've actually got an email that I'm looking at things. Discover the hidden stories slumbering in your PC. So, you know, most probably if you look at an email exchange of things of you and your friends and parting and different experiences you're having and then meeting again and all of those sorts of things, there's stories within that actually have quite a lot of data. But of what value is this? So you can actually say, well, you're suddenly saying, well, who is the value for? It's on a personal, emotional value. So it's value for me in itself. So I can't sell that on because it has no relevance to anybody else. But you can actually say some of the work data, I've worked out on this, we've had a certain processing going through projects. I've got a new project. I've got a roadmap of how I go through there. I've got templates of how I did a door schedule or a window schedule or this or that or the other, or a hardware schedule and stuff. So you've got processes of how you do things that your previous work can actually give that. Now that's a value if somebody says, oh, I built this website, and somebody says, oh, that's nice, can I have a website like that? And you say, yeah, I'll charge you so much to do it. So you can actually take a template of what you've got as your website and actually use that to build a website for somebody else and charge them something. So that data has value as well. Generally though, your own personal data is just stuff that you've gathered over time. So we've gone with this story of we started with the pooter and it's starting to fill up and things are starting to slow down. Well, first of all, I say before you actually do anything, first clean your computer up. So what do I mean by cleaning the computer up? There's a thing here, cleaning PCs. There's a couple of videos here and I put links down to them of how to free up more than 30 plus gigabytes of disk space on Windows. There's a couple of ones, and there's actually Windows cache and things through here. So the useful things to do through there. Now, I suddenly thought, oh yeah, that's 30 gigabytes, what a load of waffle. But I actually cleaned up 2 of my PCs using both of these videos, and it only takes about, well, actually it takes a while because of the fact it's going through, when you're doing a disk cleanup type thing, it takes a while to go through that. But, you know, it's only a couple of hours or something. On one of these, I ended up with 40 gigabytes free because I ended up realizing that I actually had 2 Linux servers running on the back of, or 2 Linux virtual boxes running on my PC. And then the second one, I actually got 20 gigabytes out of it. So 60 gigabytes of cleaning up. And a lot of them were just temporary files that are generated, or cache files that are actually generated all the way through. So it speeds up. Now, why that speeds up your computer is that if you've got I actually did this on my server as well. So I've got a VPS, a virtual private server, that I've had running for about 4 years. I boot it up and update the software. But I had 27,000 temporary files in one folder. Now, nearly all of those files had 0 in them. They were just created, but they stayed there. So when you're indexing all of the files, and when it's actually going in and doing, I'm going to go and read C drive, and you see that big green bar slowly reading the files to the point where you can actually go down and go into the subdirectories, it has to index all of those 27,000 files, which are doing nothing. So blowing them away suddenly speeds up a lot of this sort of stuff. So number one is clean your old stuff off first of all. The second one I would say is, okay then, storage and backup of, the second thing I do is you say an inventory of what files have you got. And when I actually started to look at my files, I actually had a whole lot of different ones. I had a lot of media files. I had audio book ones, ebook ones, video and TV, videos for those, for films and stuff, and also videos that I'd actually created on topics and things. And then there's photos, and then there's music and stuff that you'd actually gathered over time. So there's all of that media that you actually consume as you go along. Now, I tend to use a lot of streaming at this point in time, but if it gets to a certain point of the night where it gets a bit slow because everybody else is on the interwongle, I can actually just copy one of these across and actually watch one of those videos to actually entertain myself at night. I also have project files. So a lot of the project files, as a designer, I'd have CAD files or BIM files and things like that. And a lot of those are quite big files. So they take a little bit to store. Now, a lot of those end up with a backup file. So a lot of them, I think my BIM ones ended up with something like 3 backup files. So I had 4. So instead of just having, let's just say I had a gigabyte file on a particular project, because I had a backup file of that, I then had 4 gigabytes of that particular file. So suddenly I only got data for 1 gigabyte, but I've got 4 gigabytes of storage, and the backups aren't doing anything, especially the older ones. So you know, you actually have to go through and do a bit of a cull. So you suddenly realise you're being a bit sloppy with your storage. It's just handy to have lots of storage, but suddenly it's just puffing up quite madly. So that's quadruple the amount of space that I actually need for that particular file. Now, with project files as well, I'd actually have my main modelling files and things like that to do with that. But then there'd also be all of the issues. Like every time you did an issue to a client, you create a whole lot of PDFs. and you'd be issuing the client maybe 20, 30 times, and then you'd issue all the other consultants, the engineers, the structural engineers, building services engineers, electrical engineers, lighting engineers, blah, 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 blah. And then you'd also have issues to the municipality or the local council when you're getting approval for those sorts of things, and that might come back and do this, so there might be 3 or 4 issues there. You then actually have the ones from the building. You can have 15 or 20, but a lot of those tend to be just small tweaky ones a lot of times. So suddenly you end up with, for a project, you get a lot of photo files, which can be quite big, or video files if you're going around a video, but some other things. You've got your main model files as you're going through with a lot of the variations and revisions and things like that. You've also got all of these issue files, and then you've also got your specification files and lots of product information things and all your query stuff with the builders, etc., and instructions to builders and things. So these sorts of things bloat quite a lot quite quickly. So these ones here, but a lot of the times you actually only got a couple of active, or 5 or 10 active projects, and they're parked or picked up or whatever they're doing. But then you've also got older closed project files, so they take up a lot of room as well, and those need to be stored somewhere. And then also, like, I'm running, I freelance, so I'm running my own business, so I've got to keep a lot of records from tax and other things about that, so I've got to keep that information. And then I also have a website, so I'm running about 5 to 7 websites. Just some of them are pretty naff, but I've also got to back those up, so that's a database and the actual structure of the files and the plugins and the things of just the whole skeletal structure of how they actually all fit together. So I was suddenly thinking, okay, this is the sorts of files that I've got. Some are going to be big, some are going to be small. Then we can go in and we're suddenly saying, well, okay, then how are we actually storing things, or what have we actually got for all of these things? Now, on mine, I've got 3 PCs that I use. Now, I've got one at one end of the house, one at the other end of the house, and I've got 2 at one end of the house. If I want to do some work with no distraction, I've got one PC with hardly anything on it so that I don't get distracted by anything else. And then I've got my main one, which actually runs some of my more intensive programs. I've also got a couple of NAS drives, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but basically that's network attached storage. So they're large places where you can store files. So on one of them I've got a 4 terabyte disk, hard disk that's running 24 hours a day, and I've got a second one which has got 2 bays, and so it's got 2 terabytes, so it's equivalent to the other one of about 4 terabytes. I've also got external backup drives, and I've actually had a couple of these fall over quite recently, and I'm a bit peeved with those. And then I've got some Google Cloud, but for free I've got 15 gigabytes on the Google Cloud, and for the OneDrive I've got about 2 gigabytes free. And I also have my VPS, so that is my virtual private server. So that's a server which is running Windows 10. It's Windows, Microsoft Server 16 or something like that. And so it's a full server that's running my website. So if you go and look at that website, it's going over to that server or to a CDN of that website. So that's where they're running as well. Now that there's VPS actually just acts as a computer, because it's basically a computer. It's running Windows 10 on there, and you can store your files there, and it's got the websites that they're set up there as well. It was running a few other, an asset database server as well, and it was running a couple of other servers. So when I'm experimenting, I use that to experiment. So I am paying for cloud storage, but I'm not actually using it as cloud storage. I'm actually using it as a computer where I'm doing work, which is having my websites and stuff running and doing backups on those, and a couple of other activities when I'm actually exploring things. It then says, what do I need to store and how many copies and where? Now at this point in time I actually just want to pause here and go back to the other one through here and talk about 2 things, about how I use my computers. So this is another thing, if I go and work in an office, they've got a computer set up how that office wants it, and so you've got to conform to what they do. When I'm at home, I want to do things in a certain way. Now, one thing specifically is I work on a computer, and then when I finish with that computer, I turn it off, I unplug it, and it might go into sleep mode, or it might actually, I might close it down completely. Normally after about 2 or 3 days, I normally close it down completely just to clear the RAM and start it up again. So I don't have the computer running all the time, and I don't. So and I don't like automatic backup. And the reason I don't like automatic backup is because I've had a few experiences where I'm suddenly working on a project very close to a deadline or something like that. I'm in a big model, I'm in something with a really intensive program where it's chewing up all the RAM on my computer, it's using the graphic card to its fullest, it's doing all of this, I'm trying to crash all of these changes as quick as I can through there, and suddenly the computer dies. It goes down to about 1 kilometre an hour from 100 kilometres an hour, and what it's doing is it's doing this automatic backup. It's decided that this is the time that it needs to do it, and it suddenly completely disrupts my workflow, and I find it so frustrating that I'm suddenly thinking, okay, I'm going to lose data, but I ain't having automatic backups. Even small files where I'm just backing up to the cloud with a couple of folders, I've found those tend to be a bit disruptive as to when they do. Now, because I only have the computer on when I'm working on it, I don't have it running 24 hours a day. Another reason, to a certain extent, I tend to work on laptops, and so I don't want the screen to burn out either, and not that it's really as much of an issue as it used to be in the very old days. So I turn it off, and so therefore I can't back up from my PC in the middle of the night. I don't want to do that. I'd most probably suddenly think I don't need to back it up every single night. I most probably need to back it up in once a week, and I don't want to remember that I've got to leave my computer on once a week. I don't like that sort of thing. So I prefer a manual backup process, and in fact it sort of fits in with some of the things I do. Like a lot of times the project, you've done an issue, and that's the time when you'll back up that project, and just to make sure that it's updated in a lot of the things. Prior to that, generally you're working on a few things. There's not that many changes from the previous issue, so you can sort of keep it going in a way. It's my attitude with a lot of the stuff that I do. So I just want to highlight those. So let's just go back and start looking at the data again. So there's a value of the data, and then there's this one here of what value is the data to do. And then there's one on Lifecycle of Data. You capture your data, you're going to preserve your data, and you're going to access your data in the future, and maybe you're going to transform the data. So you capture the data, you've created some data, or you purchased something and brought it down onto your computer. You want to preserve it, so how are you going to store it? And then the next thing is you might want to access that in the future if you want to watch a video online, or sorry, that you've got stored somewhere, or you want to listen to an audio book that you want to put onto your mobile phone or whatever, that you can copy it across to there. And you may want to access a particular project or something that you're doing, or maybe what you've got is you've got an old project and you've got a door schedule, or you've got a certain thing like an Excel sheet that's set up for something that you can just delete that data inside that, use that as a template for the stuff that you do. So instead of starting from A, you're starting from C, because you've already got the template already set up that you're using from another one. So inside here, there's a thing of, why keep your data? And there's this generalized thing of it improves people's life. I'm not too sure. This is generally a bit of a businessy one. You can make informed decisions. Data is equal to knowledge. So if you've got information there, you can use it as supporting information. Right? So instead of anecdotal evidence, you've actually got good solid data that you can represent on. So you kind of think, well, I've done a project of that, and this is how much this is how many drawings we ended up needing, or this is how long it roughly took to do that one. So you can do comparative stuff because you've got good data that you can represent it on. You can stop molehills from turning into mountains. So if you're suddenly thinking, oh, I've just got to do a door schedule or something like that, and you're suddenly thinking, I'm going to start at point C, and then you're suddenly thinking, no, I've actually got to set up the whole spreadsheet and do all of that. Suddenly, what you thought was just a simple little thing suddenly ends up being a big ordeal, because you've got to go back and do a whole lot of structure. Whereas if you had the data, you suddenly have to wipe out, make a copy of the other one, and just use it as a template straight away. So you're jumping in. So it saves you from thinking that you're starting at one point, but in fact you actually have to start 2 or 3 steps back. You can get the results you want because you're predicting it. So let's just say you're budgeting or something like that, and you're budgeting things. You've got data of previous projects and things like that you can look at where the data is, or you can look at your rough costings for things to see how much you've actually got. You can find solutions to the problems you've gone through other projects. You understand we had that on so-and-so project. Look, here it is, and this is what we did here. Again, backing up the arguments, that's similar to what I was talking about with the CV, is you can say, look, there's my CV, here's the project, and let's just talk about this project here, and these were the issues through there, and you can take somebody through to do that. So you stop the guessing game, because you've got, you're suddenly thinking you've got a whole process, so you can actually look at another project or something like that and suddenly saying, we had to do all of these steps through there. This is something that I actually do personally, if I kind of like doing lots of different things, and I usually try and write a blog so that I've got the steps or the issues that I had when I did that. So if I come back to doing a similar thing a year later, I can go and look at that blog and I suddenly think, oh yeah, those were my personal problems, because I have a habit of doing things not in a logical pattern but in a sort of haphazard pattern, and yeah, I actually find you can do that sort of thing. You can be strategic in your approaches. You can suddenly say, well, this was the planning schedule that I did, so I did a Gantt chart or whatever on that particular project. This is sort of similar. We can take bits of that information out there to see about these certain deadlines that we've got to hit along the way, so that you can give preliminary information to do that. You know what you're doing well. You can actually see solutions that you've got, and you've found solutions. So now that actually ended up being a really good solution. We'll take that solution and go and use it somewhere else. So you're repeating things which are reliable and repeatable. So that's quite good. You can keep track of it all, as again you sort of know how other project structures are for your projects and how they flowed. You can sort of see bottlenecks or issues that happen, such that you can then suddenly saying, well, that happened, we know that train was coming down the tracks, let's move away from that, or let's try and avoid that by getting this person on the team at a lot there. You can make the most of money. Like if you actually save your budget, as you actually see when you're going along, you can see what you're spending on what you've got. If all you do is you spend your money, you've got no control over everything. So actually having data gives you something to make you informed about what you're doing. And you actually have access to those resources. So again, if it's your personal data on your PC and what you've got, and the interwongle goes down or something like that, you've got the information where you can still access it. So that's one of the things through there. These ones are sort of more general and a bit waffly in a way. So we come to the next part through here, which is, to me, is the important one, or it's one of the ones when I was suddenly thinking, well, what are the rules for backing up data? And that they use this 3-2-1 example. You create at least 3 copies of your data. You store the copies on two different storage medias, and you store 1 copy on an off-site storage. So that could be in the cloud, or it could be in somebody else's house, because if your house burns down, then or whatever, then you've got that storage somewhere else. There's massive flood or something happens, you don't have access to that, you've got to access somewhere else. Now this is an example that I just want to talk at this point in time. This was an external drive that I actually have. Now my strategy at this point in time for doing backups and things like that is to put it on lots of small things, because this thing failed and I lost everything. So if I'd have suddenly say I've got 1 terabyte of data that I need to store, I could actually make 2 copies or 4 copies onto this one here. But if this crashed, I've lost all 4 copies. So suddenly I don't have. So this is where they say at least 3 copies on different storage media. So don't store all of your things, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's basically saying put them into separate baskets. Then if one of your baskets breaks, or somebody goes and breaks one of the eggs, the other one's still got some data through there. So this is starting to come through. The next bit that I just want to leap through is cloud and NAS data. So this thing here is a NAS drive. Inside here is just a little box, and it's got a little computer that can actually run a couple of apps in the background. Like you could do a scheduled backup, and it would copy the files to somewhere else on your system that it's connected to. So this one here has an Ethernet port at the back. So if we just pop onto this one here, you see it's got a little Ethernet port, and it's got a USB drive, so you can put it back up. And it's got a power, and so it needs to be powered up. There's a 4 terabyte drive of one of these is the one that I've actually got into there. And basically that will now connect to your router in your house. So from that router, you can then get Wi-Fi all the way around the house. So if you're connected to that Wi-Fi system on the house with your PC, you can then go and read the files on this drive from your over the Wi-Fi, or else you can connect with an Ethernet cable, a Cat 6 or a Cat 5 or whatever, and plug it directly into the computer, in which case that'd be a lot faster again. So that's all the NAS drive is. It's basically a sort of a mini computer with all of the guts, everything thrown away apart from storage, so it just focuses on storage. I've got two of them. I've got the 4 terabyte one, which is one, and I was worried about this thing falling over. So what I ended up doing was I ended up going and getting a second NAS. Now this is a NAS Enclosure, and the way that it reads and writes, the other one is an older one and can be a little bit slow. This one I can put in 2 hard drives. So the hard drive size, it's a SATA hard drive, so it has this configuration in the drive, and you could get I've actually just got two terabyte ones, so I've got the equivalent of 4 terabytes in this one. Now I suddenly thought, oh, now I was using that for a backup because I was worried that this first one was going to fall over because it's 10 years old. In fact, it's the most reliable thing I've got. My straight external drive where I used to plug into the computer, that's died, but this thing's just going and going and going. Now this second one somehow got a glitch in it, and I lost, I'd mirrored one of the, at least 2 terabytes off one of the, off my cloud. This you can partition, they call them shares, so you can split them up and actually just store things in different folders. It doesn't actually suddenly saying it can only take that much data, it just carries on filling up until all the data's done. So you might actually have 90% in one share and 5% in other shares, or you might have 15% in one share and whatever, any old configuration. It just splits it into things and it starts filling up as it needs to, so it's quite flexible. So one of mine was actually the media share that I copied across to this one here, to one of the drives, and it all disappeared. Boom. So I had to reformat the drive, and it's all running nicely now, and I've made another copy across. So these ones connect to the router, and so they can talk to each other through the router, and so they can talk externally up into the cloud as well. And in fact, on one of these, I think it's this one here, I've got backing up a couple of my folders, small folders, up into my Google Drive as well. So it's just as an exercise, not that I do. Now, generally in the past, I've just used these as basically external drives. I haven't been using the apps on them, but they've got apps which will actually back up things at the time. Now, because this runs 24/7, I can actually back up from this one onto this one so that I sync 2 folders, so both of my media folders are up to date. So they're both up to date and synced together. And that can happen at 2 o'clock in the morning. I can actually just say I'll sync them, whatever, because that's not on my main computer when I'm actually running the programs that I actually want to do. So I don't mind if that one's actually chugging away and doing a whole lot of stuff and doing backup, because it isn't going to affect how I'm actually working on my PC through here. So I use this one as a backup. But when I lost all the data on there, I was quite upset because one of them was a mirror of another one, but the second one actually had new data and I lost that. So I was a bit peeved about it. So I suddenly thought, well, what can I do? Now again, I actually had just a basic external drive, which is similar to this one here. It's just all in a big plastic lump, and it's got a hard drive in it, and this one's got a hard disk, so it's a spinning disk in here, and then you just connect into here. This one here, the 4 terabyte one, came out of a large stand-up one which I had, similar looking to this one here. So it was just a stand-up, and you just plugged it straight into the computer, and then you just copied the files across to whichever one, just read it as another drive on your computer, and you could back up that stuff. But when all of that got lost, boom, this happened. So I instead of actually that, I started to look at this thing here. So I started to use an external enclosure. Now the enclosure means that I can actually swap out the drives inside there. So I can actually back up one drive, and then I can take that out, and then I can back up another drive and back up another drive and back up. A bit like floppy disks, you're actually just putting it into a floppy disk enclosure for people if they don't. The one thing with the big ones, these 3.5 ones, is that you've got to have a power source and a USB for the data. So they're 2 separate things to do. Now what I've been doing is I've been buying old SATA hard drives, So these are SATA hard drives. I've been buying them about 500 gigabytes. So I'm paying about $10 for them, but with courier and that sort of stuff, it ends up about $20. So that's about $20 New Zealand, so it's about $10 US. So of that, I get 500. So for $20, I can get a terabyte of data on them. But I don't want a terabyte. I actually want 500 ones so that I can store just a small amount. So if I had those, I could get 8 500 gigabyte hard drives. Now that's going to cost me more than if I just bought one big one. But what it means is, if one of these hard drives fails, I lose 1/8 of the data. When this one failed, I lost everything. And so this is why I'm using a strategic thing of backing up my files. So what we've been doing as we've been exploring this sort of stuff, we're looking through and we're looking at a strategy to do things. So we've looked at an inventory of what sort of storage we've got, or sorry, what sort of files we've got, and then we can actually suddenly say what value on the data and which ones do we want to back up and where do we want that as an access thing. And then we can actually look, well, what is our storage and backup scenario at this point in time. And with the external enclosure, I can have a massive amount of just small hard drives that I can actually just plug and play and put them in there. So instead of actually renting cloud storage and actually paying monthly incrementally for ad infinitum, I'm actually storing onto something that I purchase once, a drive, and then I actually just use that and I just keep it somewhere else. Now generally, if I actually look at what I've got, because I've got the two cloud ones, I've equivalently got, and if I mirror those across, because they're 4 terabytes and I can actually mix them across, I can actually have the data on my PC and I've got 2 other copies. So I've got 3 copies. But because one of them's a little bit, I'm a bit nervous because it's been unreliable in the past, I'm going to make a couple of copies of my other stuff as well. Now, I've lost photos in the past and I'm a bit upset by that, so I actually want to make sure that I can do that. So using an external SATA drive is quite good. Now, this is one, these ones here were costing me, the external, the 500 ones were costing me about $9 US for what I was doing. I then started to look at that, and then there's a smaller, the 2, I suddenly thought, well, actually going to the 2.5-inch ones, they're a smaller enclosure, but you actually only need to plug it into your PC so that the USB charges and runs the hard drive disk as well as transferring data as well. Now, I have found it a bit inconvenient with the larger external drive is that I'm swapping it between, if I want it on my computer, I've got to unplug the power and then drag it across, plug the power in next to my PC and stuff, or the NAS is across the room or in another room, then I've got to take it across to over there, plug in the power and things. Whereas if you've just got a little small 2.5-inch one, you can actually just drag it anywhere and just plug it straight into the computer or into the NAS. You don't need to power it up as well. So it's more flexible. So that, and I've just purchased 5 SATA drives, 2.5-inch ones, for $40 New Zealand. So that ends up being about $8 each, which is about $4 US for 320 gigabytes. So I don't mind the slightly smaller amount of 320 instead of 500, because I don't mind storing lots of different backups onto the thing, especially if it's the same thing. You know that if one of them fails, you've still got 2 or 3 other backup ones. Now, if you want something more fancier, and again, you see I'm sort of going to the bottom here, is instead of actually, you could actually, instead of doing that, you can go to the more expensive option of actually going to a solid state backup. Now, there's the M2 type backup here, which goes into, blast, I've got it, it's gone crazy again. The M2, which you can go into these narrow enclosures, and again, they're self-powered so that you can actually just run them directly. Or you can actually get these ones here, which just look, they have the same sort of proportion as a hard disk one, a disk drive. But there's no working parts in them, and also because there's no working parts, they're a lot faster, so you can go to these, but they're about $40 or $50 sort of thing for 240 giggles. So they're at least 5 times more expensive than what I'm actually paying for the hard drive equivalent. Now the hard drive equivalent ones, the hard disk, disk ones, are a lot slower to back up. But you're only doing it once and you're storing them away. And you're only pulling them out when you actually want to pull 1 or 2 files off the things overall. So generally, you're just storing them for long-term storage with a lot of your backup. Because I've got a couple of copies of a lot of the things that I've got based on my, which is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be mirroring a lot of my stuff. So I've got 2 copies one on each of the NAS. So if one falls over, I've still got another copy, and I've got hard backup copies as well. So that's what I intend to do with a lot of the long-term things. And some of the long-term things, I hardly ever use them, so I'll actually just keep them on the backup and standing alone. If I need to bring them back, then I can do something about that. So that's my strategy as to what I'm doing, and I'm suddenly thinking of what the value is. Now, as I said, I don't like doing automated backup, but doing a manual one, and with this program you can actually do 2-way, mirror, update, or custom. So you can actually set a whole load of folders between, and these ones are just doing between the 2 NAS ones that I was just testing out, and I'll talk about this particular one that is backing up later, or you can actually just back up from your local folder. And generally though, as I said, I tend to get to a project deadline at some point in time, and that's when I do the backups with those. But what I could also do with the manual ones, which I prefer because I feel a lot more in control as to doing those backups, is something like the emails or something. I can actually put a monthly reminder on my calendar, or a weekly or 2 weekly things, and I'm starting to think, oh, I need to do that. If I don't do it today, I can do it. I can organise it, do it a couple of days later, and I'm actually quite good at doing that. So I'm quite happy doing it in a manual format like this and setting up what I want. Now this is actually just going from one NAS drive to another NAS drive, but I could also have it to 2 of my PCs and suddenly saying, this is the one that I actually want to read, or that's the most updated one. So let's just synchronize between that, and I can end up with a whole load of folders on lots of different computers and make sure that they're all updated together, that it compares them and then updates accordingly. And I can do them in different configurations and just have a whole load of other ones just to see of a step through to do them in a certain ways and do them. And I find it really easy. It happens in the background, and you just sit along and you just know that it's happening there and it's not interfering with what you're doing. The other thing that I want to talk about is Obsidian. Now this I find is a brilliant thing for note taking. I'm suddenly using this a lot more. Now when I first got onto this tool through here and looked at Obsidian, one of the things it said, it's free, but what you can actually do is, if we come onto the thing before, it actually is, it says knowledge base, a second brain for you. It's an extensible knowledge base that works on top of your local folder of plain text files. So if we actually just go and look at that, it's not there, we'll go down into there and into the Obsidian. You see there's just a lot of markdown files, and you see they're quite tiny. So the first thing that I did when I first had this, I said, oh, it's got to be a local folder. So I put one local folder on one computer, one local folder on the other computer, and then I'd sync through the NAS. So when I finished on one, I'd sync it up to the NAS. When I got onto the other computer, I'd sync from the NAS onto that to make sure that that was updated. Then I actually thought, well, actually they're only very, very small files. So the NAS does tend to lag a little bit, but with very small files, it doesn't make any difference. So in fact, now I actually store all of my Obsidian files on my NAS, and then so when I'm writing on this one, it just automatically, the NAS is the one where it's at. Now to back that up, what I've done, there's a few things that I'm still experimenting with. One of them is the NASs actually have their own program. So there's a lot of little software apps that you can do, and they'll do a backup. This one here I think I've got that actually does a backup to a Google Drive. So you can actually you can create it so that it does a backup. So I've got a synchronization between this and my Google Drive. So it's backing up my Obsidian files, and they're quite small, and it's doing it. So if this is backing up, it doesn't bother what I'm doing on my PC at all. So that can actually happen any old time. The other thing that it's doing as well is that what I found is that each manufacturer has their own software. So this one here is where I'm actually storing the main Obsidian files on one of the disks on this one. But what I'm doing is I'm also getting this one to do an automatic sync with the software that this one's got onto the cloud one. So it's sort of like I'm backing up from the other NAS onto this one, and then that's writing a copy up to Google Drive. So I think I'm not too sure if that's a backup or a sync to Google Drive. I think that's just a backup to Google Drive. So, and there's not a massive amount of files in it. So there's a few image files on it, but that's about all. So I'm looking at slightly different solutions of making sure that I've got my backups, and then if I can actually keep them offsite as well, then that's another good thing. So the last thing with that is if we go to the Obsidian and we actually look at the pricing, one of the things that it does as well, you've got your personal, or you can do some things. You can sync. You can actually purchase per month $8 for $8 US. You can sync end-to-end encryption. So you've just got to pay that all the time. And somebody said, well, actually, there's a thing called SyncThing, which is a peer-to-peer. Now this works if your PCs are on. So if you've got two PCs on and you're using your Obsidian, it will automatically sync those across. Because they're small files, they're not going to do a major interruption if you're actually working on a big file. But it'll make sure they're both updated. But I read somewhere of somebody who said, well, what his setup was going to do was he was going to sync with the NAS. So this one would sync to the NAS, and then the NAS would sync with the other ones. So that way they would think. But the interesting thing, so they actually all, so this didn't really work if I was trying to sync peer-to-peer, because if I only had one computer open, so I was working at one end of the house, I did some work on that, I'd close the computer down, I'd come to the other end of the house. Because the one end of the house, the computer wasn't on, it wouldn't sync automatically, so I turned this one on afterwards. But I suddenly thought, if you sync to the NAS, you've always got the updated one through there. And where this was quite good is that it would also sync to the Android as well. So one of the things which I suddenly thought, well, actually on my mobile phone, I tend to actually only have a very simple note-taking app, because if I want to actually do any writing, I'll come and work off the PC directly. But I thought, oh, well, maybe it's worth actually experimenting about using a synchronization there. Now, the MyCloud, which is 10 years old, they've just had a software update, I think last year or halfway through last year. So it's got the latest operating system inside here, and also it's got SyncThing in here. Now this one here, there is a SyncThing app. It just won't load up onto mine. It just keeps on breaking, so it's not that reliable. So I haven't got it onto that one. But this one here, I do have the synchronization, so I can sync everything across to here and have them all updated so that it will actually sync to my mobile phone, even if my other computers are shut down. So it's something that I want to experiment. I don't really need it, but it's something that I'm actually just playing with at this point in time. So if we just do a little bit of a recap on all of this, and we come through of what value is your data. So what value is your data, and what it is at your stage of your life. You know, are you going to be taking all of that data all the way forward, or are you going to be doing a massive cull, or are you just going to accidentally lose it as time going because you're reasonably casual about the things? The next thing is, what strategies are you going to do? You've got this either ideal of lifecycle of capture, preserve, access, and maybe transform, or maybe just capture, preserve, and access for all the things that you want. There's a strategy of 3-2-1, create at least 3 copies stored on 2 different storage media, just to make sure that if one of them crashes, you've got the other one somewhere else, and store 1 copy off-site. So again, the safest way is to actually have just a copy, a backup copy that you've stored somewhere, and then you've got your operating stuff. So you've got at least 1 backup operating or a sync one that you've got on something like a NAS. So I would recommend a NAS. the next thing, sorry, so we're just generally talking about the backup through here. I suggest you do clean your PCs, because again, I was quite surprised just how much junky bits of temporary files and cache stuff was in there, that it did actually just clean a lot of that stuff up. Then you've actually got to do what sort of files have you got. So you need to do a bit of an inventory on what you've got and what is important to you. And at the moment I'm struggling with how I preserve emails in a way that I can quickly access those to make them usable, especially maybe by people I've been contacting, and maybe by year as well. And then you've got to do an inventory of what's that one? Is that one? So your current storage structure of what you've got and how you can link into that. If that works for you at this point in time, then that works for you. Just having one external thing on through a 10 terabyte drive and that crashes or it burns or something actually happens. You know, now I did actually have my NAS, and I live sort of in an exposed place at the top of a hill. There was a lightning strike that blew the router, but it didn't get as far as the NAS. So I preserved all of the data on the router. I ended up having to get another one through there. So I've got this stuff, and I've got to start thinking about how I'm going to back up some of my data from my websites as well. I think I need secondary ones in the house and things like that. So I've got to think about some of those. But it's sort of like, if you've got an infrastructure and what you actually use at the moment, fine, use that as a backbone. And then, but I think it's sort of like, what's the worth? What worth is these things to you? Now, at some point in time, you might suddenly think, well, actually, it has no worth at me at this point in time, but in the future it may have. So does it cost me much to make a little bit of a backup, to use some form of cheap backups? Again, as I said, I would recommend that you look at some form of SATA, some form of NAS that you actually want. If you can afford it, I'd actually say, now this is another thing, you can actually have ended up with PCs with very little storage on your PCs, and you can actually use your NAS. So you can actually get some seriously fast stuff. You can actually have SSD ones, and you can actually have, I can't remember what they're called, gates or something, so that you've got sort of 100 gigabyte or 10 gigabyte speeds, such that you can actually, instead of actually, for small things, I'm quite happy to actually have my files like Obsidian or some of my script files on the NAS drive and work from there. But for big drive files like my BIM models or things like that, it's just too slow. The reading and writing across is too slow. And somebody said for videos it's far, far too slow. But you can get newer NAS drives that actually read really fast. They're a lot more expensive, and you can get stuff with the software, so you'd actually have SSD, so the read and write's a hell of a lot faster than what they are on hard drives as well. And as long as your connections and your gates and things like that are up to the right speeds, you know, so you can go to the very expensive end, but it's sort of like, what are you doing? And if you're moving into another ways and suddenly saying, well, this is the way that I'm working, but in fact, there's another way that I can work. I can actually work off, and the nice thing, the beautiful thing with NAS in a way is that they're almost like a server. I did actually look at building my own server, but then I decided not to. I bought the box, but I didn't actually follow it up too much more, because I'd actually have to start doing everything in Linux. And I thought, too much like hard work. But the nice thing with the NAS is that it's working 24 hours a day, so therefore you can do backups at 2 o'clock in the morning, not when you're working. So if you're doing video editing and things like this, and you've got two different NAS, or it's talking across different disks where you're backing up from one disk like this, the ones that I've got is only 2 bays, but you can get ones with 4 bays and 6 bays and 8 bays and that sort of thing. So basically it's masses of storage, so that you can back up one drive, and you can actually have these RAID structures and things like that, such that you're mirroring data. So if one falls over, you've got a one that's separate that you've still got that data on, and things like that. So you can do a whole lot of smart things to actually do that. But that's at one end of the budget. I'm right at the other end, and I'm suddenly thinking, how can I do this in the cheapest way possible and actually meet all of these needs? So therefore I'm at the other end. So my recommendations are think about a NAS, even if you're only starting at the cheap end. If you find that they actually work for you, great. If you've got one already, you know what, they're good. Maybe think about having another one as well as a backup through there. I'd also think about using an external one to do long-term storage, and either have cheap SATA drives. Again, don't go for too big. If you're going for too big and it dies, you lose a lot of data each time. So make sure you do 2 or 3 replicants of the things that you do, and maybe look at going for the smaller drives because they're more transportable. So I'm actually, at this point in time, I can hook it to I normally got it hooked up to my computer, but I've actually got it hooked up to my NAS on the other side of the house because of the fact that it's reading and writing a lot quicker directly to the NAS drive. It doesn't actually have to go down the whole of the Ethernet to my computer to do that. I can just do it directly. So doing those backups ends up being a bit thing. And if you've got the smaller ones, you can actually, they're easy just to take it across and plug it into the back of whichever NAS. I can put it into any NAS or into any computer that I want. So far more transportable. You can whip out whichever drive you've got and redo it. There is a little bit of resetting when you actually go in and you're looking at the drives. You may have to, let's go into one of these. This one here, every time I replace the drive in it, so this is the one that I've got at the moment, there's one, it pops up as one of the ones through here, and you've just got to get it to basically you've got to share. I think it's in the share. No, home, no, view, drive tools, no, into here. A lot of this one at the moment is there's something. What did I have to do here? I think I had to remap the drive. Once I actually I'd turn, this has a button on it that you turn the button on and off so that the drive is spinning or not, so you're giving power to the drive. So I turn it off, pull the drive out, put the next one drive in. Because it's a different disk, you've got to drop that drive or disconnect that drive and then reconnect the drive, and it reads the new drive, which is blank, so it's not trying to read what was there before. So it takes a little bit, but as I said, you're just doing a backup once, so you're not doing it all the time. So from the SATA point of view, with the smaller one, because I haven't played with that, maybe I've got to do a little bit of fiddling on that one. And I think in the longer term, I'll most probably get one of these enclosures. I'll most probably get the clear one because it looks pretty, and I'll use that for the 2.5 hard disk ones that I'll be doing, and then I'll most probably purchase a little bit of SSD drive to actually just use as an external drive, so when I'm traveling I've got something which is a lot more reliable, because it's, if you drop it, you're not going to break the rods or anything on it at all. So I could think about these ones here, but I quite like these because they go into the same unit. So you know, rather than having too many pieces of equipment, you've got a few simple ones. So, and again, if you're just doing direct sync across with smaller files, I'd also say look at sync things through there, and also look at free file sync, because that is, I think for me personally, if you want to do automatic drive, it may not affect you and your computer and the way that you work. It does affect me, and so therefore I'm I was more happy to lose data than to actually have backup drives, because it would disrupt me when a few times when I was right in the middle of just trying to meet a deadline, and it was just so frustrating. It just sort of backed me right off doing a lot of the backups I needed to do. So I hope that's been of use to you. It's taken a few days to think about this, and I started off just suddenly thought this is my solution for what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it, and then I thought, well, no, it needs to have a bigger thing of what value, and I still haven't found a value. Now normally this would be on I've got one of the playlists which is for free productivity. This isn't quite free. Again, this is another one. I think I did the Stream Deck on that particular one. It's not quite free, but it's something that's really flipping useful. And so I think it's something that you do need to consider, because it's part of your life is here, and things like me, I'm quite upset with losing photos of things that do have, were quite important, and I can't go and retrieve those ones again. I'm not going to be working in Cambodia. I'm not going to be working in East Timor again. So those memories are gone from the point of view, or some of those memories have actually gone. So thank you very much for watching. If you like it, please give a thumbs up.